Earlier this year, EU tariffs on Chinese EVs were 10%, which was not enough to keep the Chinese EV makers from taking 25% of the European EV market. This spooked EU regulators, who increased the tariffs to up to 48%, tariffs too high for Chinese EVs to effectively compete. Regulators hoped that this measure would give European EV car makers enough time to compete with Chinese imports, but they likely only have less than 18 months. BYD, the biggest EV car maker in China, laid plans to build a factory in Hungary. By producing in the EU, they would bypass the high tariffs and be able to continue to operate in the EU market. On average, Chinese branded EVs were about 30% cheaper than the European branded counterparts. Cheap EVs were coming to Europe. In 2018, in a bid to keep his campaign promises, Donald Trump instituted a 25% tariff on Chinese EVs as a part of his greater trade war with China. In May of 2024, the Biden administration, after seeing how well the Chinese EVs were doing in Europe, quadrupled the tariff to 100%, effectively killing any chance for Chinese EV imports to succeed in the US. However, reports were emerging that BYD was opening a plant in Mexico. This caused panic to ensue in the White House. The US quickly moved to pressure the Mexican government to stop the move. Mexico offers foreign companies lucrative incentives to open factories in the country, such as free land and energy assistance. Although the Mexican government relented to US pressure and removed these incentives, BYD still moved forward with their plans. By producing in Mexico, BYD have a few options to access the US market. One such strategy is to leverage Mexico's WTO agreements. Since Mexico and the United States are members of the WTO, the US is obligated to abide by the most favored nation rule, which stipulates that the US must apply its lowest tariff rate to imports from fellow WTO members. For cars, the tariff is 2.5%. To capitalize on this, BYD will need to import its cheap parts from China, assemble the vehicles in Mexico, and then export the finished car to the US, benefiting from the low 2.5% tariff. However, the Mexican government, anticipating this strategy, has proactively increased the tariff on Chinese auto parts to up to 50%, significantly raising the cost of this approach and making it unviable. Another strategy BYD could employ is to take advantage of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, also known as NAFTA 2.0. As a member of the USMCA, Mexico benefits from a free trade agreement with the United States and Canada. BYD establishes production facilities in Mexico and ensures the car meets the USMCA's rules of origin requirements. They could export the electric vehicles into the United States tariff-free. The potential of this alarmed lawmakers, leading to 4 congressmen from the Select Committee on China to write a letter to the Ambassador Catherine Tai, who represents the United States in all matters of trade. In their letter, they asked if she needed legislative support from Congress to prevent China from using the USMCA or any other trade agreements to access the US market. But that's not going to happen, according to BYD America's CEO, Stella Lee. She said BYD has no intention of exporting their cars to the United States, and the planned factory is solely for the Mexican market. She is likely telling the truth, and the numbers back up her claim. BYD expects to sell 50,000 cars in Mexico this year, which prompted them to open this factory. And more importantly, BYD will be unable to meet the USMCA's requirements needed to export to the US. When the Trump administration renegotiated NAFTA into the USMCA, they aimed to better protect American manufacturing jobs. One significant change was increasing the regional content requirement from 62.5% to 75%. This means for a car to be exported from Mexico to the US without tariffs, 75% of its value must come from North America. This encourages automakers to source more of their parts from suppliers within North America rather than from Asia or Europe. Another major change is that the USMCA now requires that 70% of the car's steel and aluminum must be sourced from North America. This was a gift for the US steel industry, since Canada and Mexico steelmakers are less competitive. This would likely bring more business to US steel. And lastly, the most critical change is the addition of a labor content rule, where it stipulates that 40% of the car must be made with labor that pays their employees at least $16 an hour. Given that Mexico wages are significantly lower than the US and Canada's, it serves to protect American manufacturing jobs. It also incentivizes auto part manufacturers in Canada and the US to increase the wages of their employees to $16. This is the rule where BYD may face challenges. The labor value content requirement can be met in three ways: through employers working at assembly plant, employees engaged in R&D, or employers of your suppliers. Given that BYD is opening a plant in Mexico, where the average hourly wage is $4.50, it is unlikely they can meet the assembly plant credit. Additionally, BYD has no plans to establish an R&D center in North America, preferring to keep their R&D operations in China, likely to protect their intellectual property. Although the average wage of R&D employees range from $35 to $60 an hour, the jobs need to be located in North America to meet the requirement, which eliminates the possibility of using the R&D labor credit. This would mean that BYD would need to source 40% of their cars' materials from suppliers who pay their employees at least $16 an hour, significantly increasing their production costs and making them uncompetitive. On the other hand, Tesla, BYD's biggest competitor, has an assembly plant in Austin, Texas, with the hourly wage at least $22 an hour, enabling them to qualify for the 5% assembly labor credit. Additionally, with R&D centers in California and Texas, Tesla is likely eligible for a credit of up to 10% for their R&D labor. As a result, Tesla will only need to source 25% of their car parts from suppliers that pay their employees at least $16 an hour, allowing them to procure the remaining 75% from cheaper suppliers who do not meet the wage requirement. This will likely make the Mexican-made BYD cars more expensive than the American-made Tesla, rendering them uncompetitive. Until BYD establishes an R&D center in North America, they'll find it challenging to produce cost-effective EVs and are unlikely to enter the US market. However, should they decide to move forward, the US government has a not-so-secret tactic to prevent them: national security.
And imagine a world, for example, millions of cars, Chinese cars on US roads, collecting this data every minute of every day on millions of Americans and sending that back to Beijing. Imagine a world where there's 3 million Chinese vehicles on the road in America and Beijing could turn them all off at the same time.
That was Gina Raimondo, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, stoking fears of China spying on or harming Americans through their cars. Typical scare tactics to justify policy change. And it works. It was done with Huawei when federal agencies are forbidden to acquire equipment from them.
We convinced many countries, not to use Huawei because we think it's an unsafe security risk. It's a big security risk.
And it was done with TikTok, where ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, was ordered to sell its U.S. operations within a year or face ban from all U.S. app stores.
Now, the U.S. Senate has overwhelmingly passed a bill ordering TikTok's Chinese owners to sell the app within months or see it banned in the United States.
The same approach will likely be applied to Chinese EVs. And the seeds have already been planted. In February of this year, Biden has ordered the U.S. Department of Commerce to investigate the national security threats posed by Chinese smart cars, a prelude to justify the ban. The only way China could fight this is by lodging a complaint through the WTO, but the United States has already moved first. Since 2017, the U.S. has been blocking new appointees to the WTO's appellate court. By 2019, the terms of the last 2 judges expired, leaving the court without any judges and rendering it effectively non-functional. So if China were to file a complaint and the panel ruled in their favor, there would be no court to enforce the ruling, leaving China with little recourse to challenge the inevitable ban. It appears that Chinese EVs will never be allowed on American roads.